Today is storytelling time, and this is basically our story. Like, how does a girl like me, who's living a pretty standard life in the city with a normal job and a boyfriend and two apartment cats, how does someone like me end up living off the grid on a mountain in Spain on an olive and almond farm? Well, I usually try to make really helpful videos, like answer questions about living off the grid, posting about chickens and alpacas and growing my food, and sharing information about online business and digital marketing and all that sort of stuff. But when we get visitors, the most frequently asked question is basically, how did you end up living here? And I don't mind answering that question in real life at all, but I also thought I'd do a video answering it for you guys here. So, how did we end up living here, really? We used to make jokes about that. Like, I would say, I'm starting a chabradote in the south of France, and my husband would say, I'm going to be herding goats in Crete. He had a thing with Crete. And, but so, how did we actually turn those jokes into our everyday reality? And I believe that's a combination of three different factors. It's the financial bit, it's the actual dream, and it's a mindset thing as well. So let me explain here for a minute. And I'll try and keep it short, but I just want to tell you a bit about how we ended up here, living here. So the first thing that did it for us was me starting my own business. I started my own business. I was working as a personal assistant and turned virtual, so I could just work from home or work from anywhere. And I did it as a side job for a while, but I remember that my job, I was still working for someone like as an employee, and that stopped somewhere in April. So come May, I would be just on my own, self-employed and nothing else. And the first thing I did in May was go travel for 2 weeks with a friend in France. Then in June, I went to the US and Canada and drove around there for 4 weeks with my husband. In July and August, like we were back at home in Amsterdam, but it still felt like some kind of vacation. Like I would just work when I wanted and wherever I wanted. Like I could just take my laptop and take it to the park or go visit my parents in Belgium for a few days and just take my laptop and my iPad with me and my phone, of course. And I would be working whenever I wanted and wherever I wanted. And that was it was a big shock for me that this was possible. And so I wasn't making enough money to pay for a lifestyle in Amsterdam, but traveling around, like I realized I was making enough money to pay for that at least. So that was one thing that made me realize maybe a different lifestyle is possible. Then, as I just said, we spent 4 weeks traveling around in the US and in Canada, and the thing that really grabbed us there was the open space and nature and like how big everything was. And we got back to Amsterdam after the holidays basically, and we just felt cooped up in our little apartment, and then going out there were always people everywhere, etc. So we just decided one day, like, hey, maybe we just want to get out of the city. And that was that was the only thing. Like I just wanted to, or we just wanted to get out of the city. I had always been passionate about self-reliance and grow my own food and keeping animals, like having goats for cheese, etc., and getting off the main connections and just being more self-sufficient, etc., and living a simple life, of course, making more time for what's really important for me or for us. And the man of the house, he was working on corporate and he wasn't feeling it anymore. And he really got on board with the off-grid idea, but mainly for the tech side of things. Like he loves fiddling around with all the tech stuff. So for months we were talking about it, dreaming about it, making actual plans. Like we would be drawing a house, we would be thinking of financial stuff. We would actually be looking for properties online. Um, but yeah, that's one thing, right? You're making plans, you're having dreams, but that doesn't mean you have to implement it. And that's when the third factor came into play. So the first one was the financial bit, where I started my own business and we could actually afford to live somewhere else and still make a living. The second one was where we actually were making plans and had a certain dream to chase. And then there was that mindset shift that we had, because everyone makes plans, right? Everyone says, oh, one day I'll be sailing the Atlantic, or one day I'll be traveling the world, or one day I'll live in the south of France in a little house, or whatever it is. We all have plans, but many of us don't ever make that reality. And that almost happened to us because we were thinking, of course, what if we do it and we fail? Like, we would lose a lot of money, we would lose all of our savings, we would lose a lot of time. Like, hey, what if we lose 10 years of our lives trying to make it work somewhere else, or even 5 years or 2 years? Like, that seems like a lot of time when you're still in there. So what if we do it and fail? And then at a certain point, we had this mindset shift where we thought, like, what if we don't do it? Like, what would our life be like if we don't do this? And we picture ourselves just always wondering what would have happened if we actually did it after all. So that was one main thing that did it, just picturing ourselves not doing it. So um, and so that's the thing, basically. We could do it financially, we had the plans, we had the dream, and then we just realized, hey, we just should do it now. Now, how we actually got here, as in here in Spain, our little off-grid property. First, we were living in Amsterdam at the time, so first we looked, well, not really, but we thought about buying something in Belgium or Holland, because building our own off-grid thing, even if it's just a tiny house, it would require our own property. And land is expensive in Belgium and Holland because there's lots of people there. And you're not even like that far away. Even if you buy something pretty rural, you're still like you're only 2 minutes from the next house, less probably. So we had our mind set on France at first because French is my first language. So we thought, oh, it's not too far, so we can still visit family easily, etc. And we'll just go to France somewhere somehow. And we started looking, and then one day, in January or February of that year, we actually had a trip planned to France. We had been looking at properties, we had a few lined up, and we were going to go and look at them. And then I was Skyping with a friend who lived in the south of France, and it was winter, and he was complaining about, oh, it has been raining all winter, the solar panels are like, he did have, or his neighbor had solar panels, and they weren't providing him with much electricity because there was hardly any sun, and it was, yeah, and it was still cold, and he was complaining about stuff. And that made me look at the difference, especially in winter, between France and Spain. And that did it for us. Basically, winters in Spain are nicer than in France. So instead of going to France that one time, we went to Spain, and we didn't find it right away. Like, it took us a few trips. We almost bought something in Catalonia, which was not the right fit for us, but we really almost did it. Um, but we ended up finding, yeah, this guy who was selling property in and around Matarania, where we ended up. And I remember we were driving in from sorry, from Zaragoza, and it's pretty deserty in Zaragoza. Like, it's not very beautiful there. But then suddenly we drove into this area that had green and water and trees and mountains, and it was just beautiful. And I said to my husband back then, like, if that's what he's selling, then I'm buying it. And that's what we ended up doing, basically. We fell in love with the landscape. We fell in love with the people here. They're so nice as well. And we fell in love with the property that we ended up buying, of course. And that property had a little shed on it. And yeah, the man of the house restored it. Like, he came straight from corporate, and the first thing he did was actually restore a little animal shed. It was a stable for a mule and a horse before we came here. Or a mule and a donkey. I don't remember. I'll ask. The mayor actually knows about that, because when he was little, a mule, I think it was a mule and a horse living in there. Anyway, not relevant. But basically, that was his first project when coming here. He renovated that little shed while we were living in the small house in the village. It was winter too, so we didn't want to be camping. However, come spring, we were able to move into that little shed, and we did a house sit the winter after, but basically we lived mainly in that little shed until the actual house was ready. And the funny thing is about that is, we always said, oh, we're not that type of person. We're not going to live in a shed while our house is being built, but living on your own land. And especially here in Spain, you don't need much inside space. Like, you can be outside most of the time, most days. And it was actually pretty awesome. So yeah, that's the story of how we got here, in short. And That made me believe that you basically need three things to make it happen. And the first one is, of course, enough money and a source of income. You definitely do need that. And you shouldn't rely on finding a job here or finding a job wherever you're moving to. Um, yeah, that's my general theory opinion about that. You need a sound and realistic plan. Like we spend a long time planning and having dreams and drawing up and making plans, etc., before we actually put it into practice. And of course, perseverance, because things go wrong here just as often as they do elsewhere. But yeah, the difference is when things go wrong here, at least I've got a view and I can go and sit with the chickens or the alpacas, and yeah, life is different here. So if you have any questions about any of this, do feel free to ask. I have no big secrets, a few small ones, of course, not giving you the number to my bank account. But basically, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments and I'll be happy to answer them. And I'll also love to hear about your story. Like, do you have a story of living off the grid? Make me a video, or send us a blog post that you wrote about it, or just tell us about it here in the comments. I would love to hear about it.